The basic kind of general concept for framing is, you have this metal building and you have like a zillion bolts, okay, that are bolting the building together. And so we're going to use the bolts to attach the framing. When the bolt is attached to the hut, like so, imagine the Quonset hut, we have this device called a coupling nut, or a piece of hardware. And that is threaded to match the threading of the building bolts, which is 5/16. So on the inside, we're going to attach the coupling nut. And now we have some open threads. And so the next piece is commonly called a threaded rod or an all-thread rod, and it's just basically a long rod of varying lengths, and this is just threaded like a bolt, all the way along the rod. And these are, you can get these at Home Depot, you can buy them online. When you can have your threaded rod screwed in. Now this is hanging down inside the building, and we can drill through the wood framing, and the wood framing can come on and get bolted on, and then we can cut this off. I mean, that's the basic gist of how you attach to the inside. But then the questions become, how do you really then turn that into, from just a little simple concept to like, well, let's do this throughout the whole building and make it work in a way that gives us a good interior, for our hut. So, and then in the next step, after you get all your hut framing in, you're going to run your electrical and plumbing lines, and then comes the spray foam. So the spray foam insulation can grab everything and glue it together. Let's look at the first blog post that I want to share. So this was a blog post I wrote in 2017. We were in the process of building our huts at the compound. So you can see here the back of what we call our headquarters hut. We were camping in the partially finished hut. Those were the days. Boy. All right. So here, when we scroll down to this, here we've started enclosing our toilet, our bathroom. We had our toilet on the slab and functioning before we even had a room built around it. It was hilarious. And anyway, here we have, you can see the coupling nut and just a horizontal 2x4 bolted on, and then we cut this off. We cut the threaded rod, cut that off, and then in this scenario, we just used that then to attach these studs and be able to bolt the wall, the wood framed wall, to bolt that to the Quonset hut end wall. Now, I'm on record, and I still defend this statement, that in this case, we used the manufacturer's end wall, and then we built our wall inside of that, and eventually we framed out this entire wall on the inside and insulated that. I would maintain that if we were building this building again, we would simply build a wood framed end wall, and it would actually be simpler and more straightforward and cheaper, because if you're going to frame it I'm a little bit of a digression from the framing, but not really. I mean, the discussion of manufacturer's end wall versus framing your own end wall is actually, it is relevant to this topic of framing. And for reasons that I think are going off topic, the way that their end wall attaches at the top is really not very good. Sort of go with me for now, the manufacturer's end wall. If you're building this for a house, you really don't want the manufacturer's end wall. You're going to frame your own end wall, and that's really the topic that we're on today. Ask me sometime, or I'll do a separate video on the best uses and the best avoidances of the manufacturer's end wall. Let's just leave that there. So here we started building our little interior wall for our bathroom. And so there's a blog post where I sort of describe that and discuss it. And this was my first experience with bolting this stuff on. Now, if you were using this method to go all the way up over the arch, you're only going to have 1.5 inches to insulate before you're wanting to put your ceiling over that. And that's not enough insulation. 1.5 inches of insulation is not enough to prevent condensation or meet any kind of energy code or be to residential standard, really. So we need more depth. 1.5 inches of depth for insulation is not enough. So when we went to frame our whole interior, I thought, let's get as much depth as we can, and let's try and separate the wood from the metal with a space. And I came up with this idea for, this is now another blog post from October of 2019, once we got around to that we're going to frame the interior here. And at this point, I hit on this idea of we'll build these plywood arches and then frame the 2x4s from arch to arch. And that'll allow us to be able to create a gap in the back between the wood framing and the metal, where the insulation can fill in all in between there. And we can have the 3.5 inches of the 2x4 plus the extra space of the gap and really get a lot of insulation in there. So I have a whole blog post on how we did that. And you can see, we were able to get a few inches of good space in between the framing and the metal arch. So in that sense, it was a success. But I gotta say, laying out all of these curved lines and cutting them with the jigsaw, and here in this photo, we're over at the loft house and we're on the floor because we had a large flat slab that we could just work on there. But engineering wise, I was just sort of making up the depth of the arch, and then we did like four layers of plywood. So at 1.5 inches, 3/4 of an inch plywood, that made a 3-inch. So we had 3 inches thick, and then the depth of the arch was about 10 inches, I believe. And we laid them out on the floor and glued and screwed them together, and then weighted them down so they would all be really flat and straight when we glued. But we did like half and half of the arches at a time. And then we built these little wooden boxes to sort of hold it up off the floor to give us a kind of base to attach to as we went then. Because we couldn't really, I guess the way this arch was, it would have been like difficult to straddle the base plate there at the bottom. And so we built it up on these little platforms, and that helped us kind of shim things and get it all straight and stuff. And then we assembled them half and half, and then glued and screwed them up in the air. And then we put these temporary braces to sort of hold them to a straight line. But this was an incredible amount of like super tedious, fussy, and time-consuming work. Now, it was very strong. It was strong enough. Well, it was strong enough to hold me, a 180-pound man on just hanging from a single point at the top. So strength-wise, I think it was fine. Time-wise and difficulty in figuring it out, and then in getting trying to keep these lines straight, and so locating that point on the end wall, and then measuring how do you measure along there to a point in space up in the top? And so we were dropping plumb bobs to the floor to measure, and the measuring was super tedious. And that was my big takeaway, was this is just so much work to get it all lined up and straight. So it worked. It was a successful method. I am never doing this again in a building, though. It just took too much time and trouble trying to get that all lined up and straight and everything in place. It worked for us, and I'm not recommending it because there's an easier way to do it. The way that I came up with next, which is really what I think is the best way to do this. This image is a client project of mine, actually in Alabama, and this was a hut that's 70 feet wide. This gigantic 3-story house. It was a really great project. But this is really kind of state of the art in my mind for framing and attaching with the coupling nut, the rod, drilling lengthwise, and countersinking the bolt here. In my mind, this is really the way to do this. And then what you do is they sell rigid foam insulation in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets like a plywood sheet, but it's rigid foam insulation. The typical thickness of that is 2 inches. So here we have a 2-inch thick block of foam, and the foam is sandwiched between the wood and the metal, and it gives a thermal spacer between the wood and the metal. And bolt these on, and now here a little further along down the board there, where they're overlapping 2 boards, and then we have a kind of a plate that's patching them together there, and then a perpendicular. So the perpendicular, that's called blocking. So in framing, where you have short perpendicular pieces that go from member to member to member and tie it all together, it's called blocking. And that's an important, the blocking basically takes all of these individual, you have all of these individual joists, and when you run a line of blocking, it ties it all together and helps to turn that from just member into, now we have a system that is tied together, and we have more of a unit that is a larger unit of connected framing versus just all these little individual joists. And so if we just page through a few images here, just to show you, again, I like to see every 4 or 6 feet, I like to see a line of blocking, tying it together. Just helps keep it all rigid, helps strengthen everything. And so here we can see at this end wall, the way they've done this, the perpendicular, call it, the 2x6s that come running out to the end, and then the foam blocks, they run right to this edge of the bottom of the arch here. And then on the inside, you can see where they've taken these, they've taken this top plate, this 2x, I think these are 8s on this end wall. It's really, really stout framing, right? And these are called kerf cuts, K-E-R-F. So these kerf cuts come in and cut about 1/3 to halfway into the board and allow you to curve that and bend it. And then you can run screws or nails up into your framing and tie the top of the wall right to your members that are all bolted directly into the arch.
If you're learning something in this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. I'm really putting effort into making some better content and better resources for you for your Quonset build. If you're interested in joining the Quorum, my online community for people that want to get a lot of great help and resources for their Quonset build, check out the link in the description below, as well as my FAQ and other resources, all in the description below. Thanks for watching. Now back to the video.
This is a project in Washington State that my client is about to move in. So here, what you can see, here's her interior all framed out. Now, here you can see it up here. And it's a little hard to see, and I apologize for that. I don't have any clear, just direct photos from her of this particular aspect. But she was using she needed multiple blocks of foam to create even greater depth for insulation, because the Washington State Energy Code really dials up the amount of insulation that's required. So for her in Washington, and this was something that we figured out ahead of time. It's not like she just learned it at the last minute. I drew it this way on the plans, and we knew this. It was in the permit process that she had to have, I forget the R value of insulation, but it was quite high. And so for her interior, for the framing, we had to do like 4 or 6 inches of insulation extra in the blocking behind the backing of the insulation behind the, here you can see all these blocks down here. Must have been 4 inches here. These look like they're glued together. And so there's one other video that's kind of good that she had sent. It's related. Her end wall is really great too. Here you can see it pretty well. When I pause it, it's a tiny bit blurry, but you can see the double blocks of insulation behind the 2x6 framing at the ceiling. So that just allowed them, when they spray foamed, they would have extra depth to spray into with the spray foam. 2 bedrooms upstairs with a bath in between. And you can see that there. So I thought that's an interesting case of requiring extra insulation. You can see the lines of blocking going up. This is an S model rather than a Q model that we saw before. That's a nice video. So that gives you a sense of using the coupling nut, the foam block. And the thing I like about just bolting on directly rather than building that arch is the bolt spacing is 2 feet on center, or 2 feet ½ an inch, depending on your manufacturer. And it's uniform throughout the whole building. The bolts go 7 inches up, 7 inches on center as they march up and over the arch. So I usually recommend every other or every third even. On a large Q model, you can do every third bolt, so you're 21 inches on center, all the way along the arch. On an S model, where it goes up straight and then you have those tighter curves, you probably need to go every other on the tighter curve. And then up on the big broad ceiling of an S model, you could do every third bolt for how you attach going around. But it's all lined up and it's all figured out. And we just spent so much time figuring out the plywood arch thing, and then trying to line everything up, trying to bring 2 separate curved half pieces of these arches together, and trying to make sure they're like exactly right to be able to get all that framing to line up all the way down through. It was super tedious. Not recommended as far as that goes. And now the other image I wanted to share was, these are from a build in Florida where there were high wind loads. And this guy is under construction right now. He's sharing tons of pictures with me and he's super excited, and I think you'll see in these photos. It's just a small little modest build, but it's going to be a really nice little house for him when it's done. Here is a photo that his framer actually sent me this, but what you can see here is a 4x6 block of wood with these little 45-degree dog ears cut off on the ends. And that's, you can't really see the bolt, but in the middle of that, it's bolted through over to the arch on the outside there. Okay, so that's bolted on, and then he's holding up this perpendicular member to sort of show me by example. And he said, "Is this right?" I said, "Yes." So the way this goes is up in here, he went 3 arches back with those blocks, like I just showed you in that photo. Okay, so here up at the top here, you can see these 1, 2, 3, all in a line of those dog-eared 4x6 blocks bolted in to the arch bolts, and then his perpendicular coming through there, coming all the way out like we talked about, and then his top plate coming through on top of that, and then his window wall framing. So he's going to have a big, beautiful window wall here. I mean, it's not a huge hut. This is like a 30-foot hut. But it's just going to be really great when he gets it done. And so here you can, so after this, then you can see where they've got their bolts, they've got their threaded rods already hanging here and ready to extend on through the building with the rest of the framing. He went to an extra step and sprayed some sealant that he found over all the bolts on the inside. We've never done that on ours, and we've never had leaks, but that's just, I'm explaining what you're seeing. He really wanted to, like, this guy is like belt and suspenders all the way. He's just getting every, every extra thing he can. I think he just wants to, he's a young guy, and I think he just wants to live out his life in this thing and have it forever. And he's just really doing everything he can to build it right from the beginning. So that's what I wanted to point out. I'm now recommending these blocks, even if you just do them at the very first arch. You don't need to go 3 arches deep if you're not like in a hurricane zone, or it almost seems like overkill, but it's like, this thing is freaking strong the way he built it, and I just think that's great. I would rather overbuild any day of the week, and anyway, back to that image just to show you again, now that we've seen the bigger picture of this. So that is my take on what I would call part 1 of framing, kind of just an overview, going into a little bit, how do you attach your end wall, a little bit of the general topic on attaching it on the inside. And in 2 weeks, on the 17th, we'll pick this up again and we'll do part 2 of the framing. All right. Quonset on. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.